Welcome back, and in this episode, we're going to do part 2 of our series of examining transportation statistics published by the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. A lot to talk about. Stay tuned for another episode of Down Payment.
Welcome to Down Payment, the podcast for used car dealers. Prepare to learn something new about the industry that keeps us moving.
Check out all our podcast content on our social media channels. We are at Down Payment Podcast on YouTube, Down Payment Podcast on Instagram, and Down Payment Pod on X. Welcome back to this episode of Down Payment. And in this episode, we're going to talk about transportation statistics published by the federal government, specifically transportation statistics that we have curated that are published by the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. The next thing I wanted to show are kind of the growth in our industry. They have a graph that shows the licensed drivers, vehicle registrations, VMT, which is their acronym for vehicle miles traveled. So the total number of vehicle miles traveled by the U.S. population in a year, and the population indexed to 1985. So 1985 equals 1, and as a result, you can extrapolate the percentage of growth over time since 1985. So over that period of time, the U.S. population has grown by approximately 40% according to the graph. But we've seen growth in the number of drivers and the number of vehicles, and the vehicle miles traveled all increase at a higher rate than the U.S. population. Again, we're showing resilient demand for our product over time, and that trend is continuing. So the number of vehicles on the U.S. roads has actually increased by more than 60% since 1985, while the population has only grown by 40%. And the number of vehicle miles traveled has increased by nearly 80%. And very interestingly, the data shows a huge drop in vehicle miles traveled during the COVID-19 pandemic, which makes sense. One of the things that I don't think we talk enough about is the economic benefits of our industry and our key role as supplying not only the transportation needs of the U.S. public, but also the tax revenue that we generate. And this graph shows the federal, state, and local transportation revenue by mode for 2021 and 2022. And highways account for, by far, the largest component of tax revenue generated across all transportation means. All transportation modes, by far, are customers on the highways paying fuel tax, paying tolls, paying all sorts of user-based transit revenue is responsible for the vast majority of transportation revenue for federal, state, and local governments. Now, one of the big things that is changing in our industry is the sudden arrival within the last 10 years or so of electric vehicles. We've had a longer experience with the hybrid electric vehicles going back to the early 2000s, but the battery electric vehicles are something that only arrived in substantial numbers in our markets within the last decade or so. And this graph shows the sales of hybrid, plug-in hybrid, and battery electric vehicles. Their unit sales in total numbers sold, also broken down by type of electric vehicle. And as we see, these numbers are growing from year to year to year. It shows a substantially smaller number for 2024 than 23 and 22. It is my understanding that that is a preliminary number, only showing half of 2024. So don't extrapolate that as indicating a drop in sales of electric vehicles in 24. But as we could see, percentage of electric vehicles as a percentage of the light duty vehicle market is growing to be something pretty substantial. We're showing about 18% of the total vehicle sales being electric vehicles in 2024. Now, the implication of that for the used market. So the vehicles being sold now is our inventory 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years down in the future. And the struggle with electric vehicles, as every car dealer knows, is our ability to recon them, our ability to diagnose, repair, and economically get them back on the market is very limited with electric vehicles. There's a lot of expensive stuff, namely a battery that is very difficult for us to replace and often costs more than the value of the vehicle. But it's something that in the used market, we're going to have to see how it evolves and identify strategies to be able to make use of these vehicles, because the percentage of the new cars being sold is now growing to a point where it's going to be significant. Now, currently, of the total vehicles on the road elsewhere published, it shows that something like 1.2% of the vehicles on the road are electric vehicles. But as we see from this graph, that's eventually going to change and be a much larger percentage of the vehicles. That's going to be a challenge for our industry to deal with. Now, to be sure, though, there is still a lot of infrastructure that has to be built out for electric vehicle adoption to become widespread and commercially viable across the entire country. This graph shows the number of chargers per 1,000 roadway miles by state. It's actually a map, not a graph, but regardless, there are only a handful of states that have a good high-density concentration of chargers to support electric vehicles. In much of the country, it's going to be a limited viability product. As you can see, a lot of the states across the Midwest, across the Mountain West, with the exception of Colorado, and the Southwest, there's just not a lot of chargers to support a large percentage of the population adopting electric vehicles. At any rate, I hope this curation of statistics provides you kind of some insights that you can then apply to the situation that your dealership is in, and that you can find some useful intelligence that you can then apply some strategy to adapt with. We could see how changes afoot, and with the resilient demand for our product, but the growth of electric vehicles, there's going to be some interesting implications for used car dealers to try to work around and make sure that we have a viable inventory that we're providing to our customers in the future. Something to think about, and now go sell some cars. It's been another episode of Down Payment. Check out our podcast on all our social media channels. We are at Down Payment Podcast on YouTube, Down Payment Podcast on Instagram, and Down Payment Pod on X.
Thank you for listening. Down Payment, the podcast for used car dealers, is a production of Meta Financial Services Incorporated.